This is BBC 5 Live.
5 Live Daily with Peter Allen.
Good morning. I'm going to speak first of all today to the wife of a cyclist who was killed by a man who'd been told by his doctor not to drive. Neil Urwin had been seeking treatment for sleep apnea. The court heard he'd driven too fast, he'd driven too close to Andy Charlton when he was overtaking him on a country road. Now, Neil Urwin got 2 years in jail and was banned for driving for 3 years. And we're going to talk about whether that is an appropriate sentence a little later. But first of all, we want to talk to Andy's wife, Katy Charlton. Good morning, Katy.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for talking to us. I know you addressed Urwin directly in court, didn't you? I mean, can you just start off by telling me what you said to him? I mean, if you've got the statement with you, could you just read out what you said?
It might take all morning to read out what I said.
Give me the approach. Give me the bit.
Yeah, so the part that I read out to him was, "We are strangers, however our lives have been irreversibly linked since the fatal accident in which my husband lost his life. I spent months asking myself those questions. Every time I was out in the car and passed a cyclist, I couldn't help but think surely there would be space to avoid an accident if the driver was passing carefully and paying attention. So I kept on asking questions. And eventually the police told me that you had been under investigation for obstructive sleep apnea syndrome. I later found out that you had been advised not to drive and also warned of the risks of driving whilst tired. Shame on you. If you had followed their advice and not driven that day, Andy would still be alive. What was so important that meant you ignored their advice, got in a car and knocked my husband off of his bike and killed him? I tell you, though, what was more important. It was important that my husband finished his bike ride and came home to his wife and children, to look after us, live, laugh and grow old with us. I like to imagine that you were a decent man who made a foolish decision. A decision that you will live with for the rest of your life. I'm sure it must be beyond difficult to live every day knowing the consequences of your actions. However, please remember, you will always be the one who suffers least. Any possible punishments you may receive are nothing compared to our family's losses. Andy lost his life, his future, his family. I lost my husband, my children and their father, his sister, her brother, and his parents, their son. This last week has taken yet another huge emotional toll on our family, but it has made me realise that there is no different for you and your family. Both of our families listening to all these small details about the lead up to that day and the minutiae of the accident. It has been horrific for all involved to relive that day. There are no winners in this case. Someone said to me recently that to understand all is to forgive all. It sums up very simply what I have thought for some time. We are just all humans, and it is in human nature to sometimes make errors of judgment. For most of us, though, we are lucky enough that those actions don't end up with tragic consequences like ours. That wasn't the case here. I just hope that some good can come from this, and lessons can be learnt by others to prevent more tragic accidents. It is now time for both of our families to move forward from that awful day. I know that if you could turn back the clock, you would, and for what it is worth, I forgive you."
That's very interesting, Katie, and very moving too, and interesting that you were able to look at his perspective as well and his family's perspective. I mean, was that read out in court, and were you able to see what the reaction was to it from the man himself?
Yes, there was more, but that was the bit I addressed to him.
Yeah.
I managed to look at him for parts of it, but to be honest, there was a bit of a mess of tears and snot by that stage. So, but it kind of completed the circle of everything that has happened. So, yeah, it was important for me.
It was. Can I ask a bit about Andy? I mean, he was a good lad, obviously, but he was caring full time for your young son, wasn't he? I hear.
Yeah, so I find it quite difficult to just sort of sum up someone to a stranger.
Quite.
But so he's quite passionate, driven, funny and strong-willed. He wanted to be the best dad he could be. And our children have lost a lifetime of love, support, fun and guidance. He gave up his job to look after our son because we thought time was more important than money. So... that was
And
that.
he looked after your son Oscar in particular. I think has got cystic fibrosis, so I'm not sure if you
Yes.
want to talk about that particular part of it. But I mean, this is catastrophic event for your family. I don't know about. I mean, what was the first, the thought you still left with? Why me? Do you sit there sometimes thinking, why me?
Not really. Life is life, and I think I've got used to the fact that you have some very big highs and some very big lows, and just because it's me doesn't mean it shouldn't happen to me. But it does allow me to now appreciate what I still have and try to make the best of it.
Yeah. The thing is about Neil Urwin, I guess he could have killed anyone that day, couldn't he? And all of us who drive should...
And he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you tried to recreate this accident, it's almost impossible. It was perfect conditions. It's just, but sometimes life does that.
Yeah. So are there any lessons you'd like the rest of us to absorb from all this?
I suppose it's to do with the vulnerability of cyclists. When passing cyclists, you've got to make sure you afford them as much space as you would a car, and that really means going onto the other side of the carriageway. And driving too fast and too close can have tragic consequences.
That's quite tough sometimes in London, for instance, isn't it? I mean, you drive around the city, I'm sure.
But true. But if you can't pass by going onto the other side of the carriageway, ensure you slow down and you are aware of how you are passing them. In the case of Andy's accident, it was a wide, straight road, and the driver passed at 55 miles per hour. And in his own statement, he gave less than 54 centimetres of space. So that's one extreme, but you just need to take care.
2 years.
Because you never think... Yeah.
Is that long enough, 2 years?
Lots of people have got a lot more anger than me about this. But the whole process of the investigation and the trial has given me time to come to terms and accept what's happened. The thing about road accidents is that they are often unintentional, and you never expect to be a victim or the cause of one. And no sentence, however long, will make it better. And I suspect that the worst sentence is living with the knowledge of what you have done. People forget that a car can be a killing machine, so people should think before they get behind the wheel of a car whether you should do so. And when you are, pay care and attention. So that's it. And a sentence doesn't change it.
So, I mean, I asked the straight question though: is that long enough? Do you say nothing's long enough? Nothing's short enough. His real sentence isn't him going to jail. It is him having caused the accident. It's him having been at the scene. It's him having gone through the last year, having been to trial, seeing us and the devastation it's caused, and now he has to go to jail. A sentence isn't just him going to jail. It is him living with it, and it's very difficult to... the judge, when he summed up, basically said he is restricted by what jail sentence he can hand out by sentencing guidelines, and it is no way comparable to what we've lost. And I can't think of any other way about it. Yeah, I understand that. Well, thank you very much indeed for talking to us, Katie. I think a lot of people listening will wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care. So that's Katie, and a very moving story. But what about the sentences, and what about cycling itself? We're going to talk about all these issues. First of all, we're going to talk to Martin Porter, QC, who is a leading personal injuries barrister and indeed a cyclist. And I think you write a blog called The Cycling Lawyer. Is that right, Martin?
I do, yes, Peter. Good morning.
Good morning to you. It was interesting that at the end there, Katie said, the judge said, by and large, there's a limit to what I can do here, almost with regret, and that what he did was a 2-year sentence. Looking at it one way, he made a mistake on the road, which a lot of us do, but looking at it another, he killed somebody. I mean, what do you think of the 2-year sentence?
Well, my own view, Peter, is it's not long enough. So I say that with enormous diffidence, having heard the very moving account from Katie and her own very forgiving nature. But The judge wasn't that constrained. He certainly would have been able to pass a longer sentence. The sentencing range for the lowest level of dangerous driving is between 2 to 5 years custody. So he did pick a point at the very bottom of that range. Looking at reports of the case, obviously I wasn't there, so I didn't hear the evidence, but looking at reports of the case, it looks as though the judge treated the sleep apnea as not of any causative relevance to the collision.
Some people are texting already to say how do you know the sleep apnea is linked to the collision? And the truth is, of course, it would be impossible to prove that, wouldn't it?
Well, the judge certainly, as I read the reports of the case, sentenced on the basis that it wasn't. But which is interesting, actually. There's an irony, because generally speaking, the Crown Prosecution Service wouldn't charge in these circumstances as dangerous driving. One suspects it must be the sleep apnea that caused them to do so, but a jury would nonetheless be willing to convict of dangerous driving because of the passing fast and close to a plainly vulnerable road user. And perhaps people who do that, even in circumstances where they don't kill, should be charged with dangerous driving more often than they are. But
what can you get for dangerous driving?
Well, the range, as I say, for the bottom level is 2 to 5 years custody, and the parliamentary fixed maximum is 14 years imprisonment. So it is regarded as a very serious offence. And although Katie, again, very movingly said that she was sure that the defendant was a decent man, I'm not so sure personally about that. If the sleep apnea has nothing to do with it, then it follows that on a clear straight road with no visibility problems, he just demonstrated a callous disregard for the life of a fellow human on a bicycle. I feel some anger at people who act in the way that he does, and I'm very conscious that I could easily have been in Andy's place.
The prosecuting counsel said at the time either Mr. Urwin was nodding off at the wheel before he saw Mr. Charlton at the last minute, or he was simply so tired he was not concentrating properly as he drove along the road. That was the accusation. But as I say,
that was the prosecution case.
Yeah.
As I say, the judge appears to have rejected that case and sentenced on the basis that this was a poorly judged overtaking manoeuvre of the sort. And 2 years custody is actually a sentence that could properly be imposed in a case of causing death by careless driving. One imagines perhaps the judge felt to himself, well, this is so many cases I see where the charge is causing death by careless driving that I'm going to sentence it accordingly.
Yeah.
But he wasn't constrained by the guidelines. 2 years is the very bottom. But the other thing I'd like to say, Peter, is I'm not really in favour of locking people up and throwing away the key unnecessarily. There must be some deterrence. But the other feature is that he was disqualified for driving for only 3 years. And in my view, somebody who has demonstrated what I've described as a callous disregard for the life of others when they get behind the wheel of a car has demonstrated themselves to be no more suitable to drive than someone who has, say, uncontrolled epilepsy. I think he should have had a very long or even lifetime driving ban following that conduct. It was not only the approach he took to overtaking a vulnerable road user, but also his, whether this was causative of the incident or not, his disregard of the medical advice that he shouldn't have been on the road at all.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to give somebody like that a license back after just 3 years. And I think there is a lot to be said, even if one leans against locking people up for extended periods of time, removing their license to drive for a long period of time. It appears to be regarded by many in the justice system as an inalienable right. Right to drive sits there along with right not to be tortured. It's just, it shouldn't be that way. People should demonstrate that they're willing to drive with consideration for others, and if they can't do that, then they shouldn't be licensed to drive on the roads.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I was trying to think about where I stood on this, because if you're a motorist, we all drive cars, and we are effectively out on the road with a lethal weapon, and we're licensed to do it, and we're told this is one of our rights: get out in your car and drive. And yet, as a result, courts just treat it differently, don't they? I mean, if I go out if I start firing my gun in the back garden and kill somebody by accident, I'm in fantastic trouble. If I kill somebody by accident with my car, I'm not in nearly so much trouble.
That is absolutely right, Peter. I couldn't have put that better myself. I mean, interestingly, you're even in more trouble if you go out and, on those very rare occasions it happens, if you kill somebody when you're on a bicycle, you're in more trouble. it's one of those extraordinary things that motorists are dealt with stunning leniency by the criminal justice system.
Right. Thank you very much indeed for that. Yeah. Sorry, was there another point you wanted to make?
Well, the other point I was just going to make is that we are all drivers, and just to pick up on one other point that struck me from what Katie was saying, she was out driving her car thinking, well, this isn't difficult to pass a cyclist in safety. It can be done. And she was explaining to you that even in London it can be done. If space is tight, you either hold back, wait, or you wait till nothing is coming in the opposite direction and use the whole of the road. It's not difficult. Those who don't do it, and there are, I'm afraid, far too many, really need to face the full vigour of the criminal justice system, and at the moment I'm afraid they don't.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the various text messages. Yeah, thanks for the various text messages I'm getting about this. Christine Sims texts, Katie, what an amazing, inspirational woman. After all she's been through, her attitude is amazing. We could learn a lot from her. Good luck, Katie, you rock, says Christine. A lot of people talking about... Well, we normally get into this debate, don't we, with the cyclists, the people who blame cyclists who don't obey the rules, and the cyclists who blame motorists and say, you don't show us enough consideration and we are in danger. In a way, it's interesting getting out yourself on a bicycle, and I confess that I prefer not to cycle along main roads in my part of the world, simply because I feel under imminent threat that somebody will come too close and knock me off, to be honest. So let's address for the next 7 or 8 minutes safety on our roads. According to the latest figures, 113 cyclists were killed last year on Britain's roads. That's slightly up on last year. Serious injuries went up very sharply, 8%. And over 10 years, they've gone up by 50%. Number of cyclists has gone up by about a third. Maybe injuries gone up rather than deaths because people traditionally now wear helmets, and maybe the injuries they're getting knocked down, but they're often surviving. Let's talk to a couple of people about this before, and obviously I'd like to hear from you as well. And we can always come back to this issue a little later in the programme if we run out of time. We can speak to Carlton Reid, executive editor of BikeBiz trade magazine. Hi, Carlton.
Good morning, Peter.
And Donnachadh McCarthy founded Stop Killing Cyclists. Hi, Donnachadh.
Good morning.
Okay, Carlton first. Is it getting worse?
Well, first of all, can I just add to what Martin was saying and what your listeners are also saying, and that was I was choked up when I'm sitting in the little studio here in Newcastle at Katie's quite amazing and moving and very inspirational testimony, and how forgiving
she's a fine woman, isn't she? Very good.
Absolutely. So if only everybody could be quite as forgiving as her. And I know Martin was expressing a bit more anger.
Yeah.
And I would certainly, if I was in that situation, would expect to also express anger. So it is an incredibly sad and moving thing that's happened to Katie, and as Martin said, it happens to far too many people, and the criminal justice system really doesn't treat motorists with the strength and vigour that they ought to do. And I speak as a motorist, and I very much appreciate the fact that both Katie and Martin mentioned, which is actually Rule 163 of the Highway Code, which is you must give cyclists and all vulnerable road users, this involves horses and everybody who's on the road, not in motors, you've got to give them the exact same space as you would a motor car. And I produced a video on this for driving instructors to teach their learner drivers, and that was done with Chris Boardman. And that's a video called Space. So I would recommend anybody who thinks they can just give 54 centimetres of overtaking distance to go and check out what they actually should be doing.
Yeah, all right. But after all that, the question was, is it getting worse, or are we getting safer on the roads? I mean, what do you think? And safety of cyclists on the roads, are they safe or not?
It depends if you look at subjective safety, which you mentioned that you don't feel safe on the roads, which is subjective safety, and then you look at statistical safety. However, statistical safety, 115 deaths a year is clearly 115 too many. Statistically, if we want to go down that route, then that's actually a reduction from many years
so
previously.
It's safer than it used to be to cycle?
Technically. But that's purely just technically.
Just looking at the numbers, looking
at the numbers.
I'm not trying to trap you into saying something you don't want to say, but
it doesn't.
On an average basis, you are safer now than you were before.
Yes, but there are more motorists than there were before, and there are more cyclists than there were before. So there are more chances for the unfortunate, and I wouldn't call it an accident, what happened to Katy Charlton's husband. It was very much a crash, an incident. It would be nice if media and everybody really didn't call these things accidents, because it wasn't an accident that person.
Well, it
killed
was
that
an accident to
cyclist.
some extent. If you didn't mean to do it, then it's an accident.
It's not an accident when you go out and you know that I know Martin said it wasn't the sleep apnea that was the cause of it. However, if you go out with a pre-existing medical condition, then no way on earth can that be an accident.
Okay. Donnachadh, good morning to you.
Good morning.
What would you say about this issue?
I was very moved by Katy Charlton's testimony, but we in Stop Killing Cyclists deal with loads of people in this situation. It's not just hundreds, there are thousands of people losing family members, parents, etc., from our transport policies. It's not just cyclists who are being killed, it's actually thousands of people who are being killed by transport pollution, and tens of thousands of people are dying because they're afraid of cycling. Katie said her husband was tragically in the wrong place at the wrong time. I would argue he was in the wrongly designed place. Why wasn't there a segregated protected cycle lane along that road? Somebody made a decision not to put that investment in.
Yeah, but Donnachadh, let us join me in the real world for a moment. The road I was speaking of, where I felt at risk, is a main road linking to towns in Cambridgeshire. It has room for 2 lanes of traffic. It doesn't have a bike lane. It doesn't have room for a bike lane. And the reason that you feel it's a hazard is because people are going along there at 60 or 70 miles an hour, and you quite clearly are not. And there isn't really room for everybody. I mean, that's
Sorry, there is room for everybody.
So what do you do?
You do what they did in Holland, is people were dying in the 70s and they got fed up of it, and they protested to their government to invest in safety. And what happened is the Dutch government are investing £30 a year per person in cycling safety, and we've now got a situation where the deaths from pollution and traffic have significantly decreased compared to
When you
Britain.
say invest in safety, you mean a cycle lane on every road?
Exactly. Wherever practical, they're doing it, and so therefore we need to do that in Britain. What has happened in this country? We spend breadcrumbs on cycling safety. We're talking about spending £1 per person in this country per annum, and the government, since they came into power, have even cut that amount.
Yeah,
of
but
money.
there are lots of priorities here. I mean, speaking of somebody who was stuck on the M6 for about 4 hours last night, we need roads as well. I mean,
Yes,
there are motorist requirements as well as cyclist requirements.
Hang on. You said priorities.
Yeah.
The government announced a national infrastructure programme today that has 20 billion per year for the next 5 years, not a penny to be spent on the priority of saving that woman's husband's life. That's what we're talking about here. Hundreds of thousands of people across Britain are living with deadly diseases because of this issue, and that should be a priority for Britain. Yes, we've got a road network, billions are being spent in it, but only tiny breadcrumbs are being spent on protecting cyclists. I know no other way. It's even economic nonsense not to invest.
Okay.
The Department of Transport said if you invest £1 in cycling, you can get up to £35 social benefit back.
Right, Donnachadh, thank you for that. I understand it's an issue on which you feel passionately. Carlton, Reid, as a final thought, what's the kind of national mood, the mood of, are we moving ahead with making cycling a safer occupation? Is it getting a bigger priority in places in our capital, in our big cities, for instance?
London is very much moving forward, and they're spending over the next 10 years £1 billion to re-engineer the roads and to reallocate the road space to give more emphasis to actually at sometimes the day the majority users of the roads, which are the cyclists. And yet, but Donnachadh was absolutely correct. The amount that's actually spent on motorists is way out of proportion to the amount that's spent on cyclists. And so in London, with cyclists being the majority users on some bridges and on some roads, it does seem rather bizarre and perverse that they only get 1% of the transport budget, even though they're 75% users of the roads.
Right, thank you very much indeed for that. Thanks for your company, and thanks for those who've been in touch. I haven't really expressed the opinion of the many drivers who've been in touch, remonstrating with cyclists. I just listening to your programme while driving and trying to be mindful of cyclists, but I've had one cross my path into the lane on the left hand without giving any indication he was about to do so, says one of the texters. I'm a police officer investigating road death. Everyone needs to improve, says Jed Hazelwood from Notts. Cyclists need to wear helmets and they need to be highly visible. Parents need to know how their kids cycle. I've stopped children recently with other children on their handlebars or carrying fishing rods. Car drivers need to slow down and look. They need to stop at junctions and when driving and look to the sides for children and indeed cyclists. One or two then early lessons in safe driving. It's an issue, as I say, we may well return to later in the programme. 28 minutes now before 11.